The hearing will come to order. This is a joint hearing of the House and Senate Western Caucuses to discuss some of the critical issues that we are facing in the West, dealing with regulatory overburden and the difficulty that we have with federal agencies overreaching and frankly failing to understand the roles that they need to be performing as they deal with us and help and work with us to administer our federal law. Senator Barrasso, the co-chairman on the Senate side, and Representative Steve Pierce, the chairman on the House side. I guess you have a co-chairmanship there. Is that correct? Are here to help preside. I will be presiding over the actual operations of the hearing, and we have with us Representative Rob Bishop as well at this point. We expect to have other senators coming through and members of the House coming through in and out during the hearing, and we'll welcome them at that time. We also have Senator Pat Roberts here, and I welcome you. This hearing is, as I said, focused on Washington obstacles to prosperity and property rights in the West. It's an important issue, and I'm glad that the two caucuses are working together closely on this, not just today, but on a constant basis as we deal with the kinds of overreach that I mentioned earlier. Today's hearing features two world-class panels of witnesses, and I'm very thankful that all of you could be here today. Idaho Governor C.L. Butch Otter, my longtime friend and colleague, will head up the first panel. The governor is here to discuss the impacts that an overly aggressive federal agenda can have on Western states and individuals, and its impact on our citizens' rights to manage their lands and resources. And thank you again, Butch, for being here today. I also welcome Mike and Chantel Sackett from Priest Lake, Idaho, and their attorney Damian Schiff, who is here to help us explain a specific circumstance that's getting quite a bit of national attention, which is just one example of the kinds of circumstances that we are facing. We are also joined with Commissioner Johnson, Mayor Fife, and Mr. Knight, who will serve on our second panel as well. I'm going to speak briefly about the case of the Sacketts as well as one other case close to home in North Idaho. Both of these examples highlight the need for today's hearing. And unfortunately, they are not unique in the sense that there are many, many other similar examples of these kinds of problems that are arising. In 2007, the Sacketts were in the early stages of building a home a short distance from the shore of Priest Lake in North Idaho. One day, representatives of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers showed up on their property and told them that they needed a federal wetlands permit to build there, despite the fact that there was no standing water on the property. The government ordered the Sacketts to stop their work, restore their land, and apply for a federal wetlands permit if they wished to build there. The Sacketts were told that if they did not comply, they would be fined tens of thousands of dollars per day. Deeply concerned about their rights as landowners, the Sacketts sued the EPA, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that they were not entitled to immediate judicial review. However, just last month, the United States Supreme Court heard their case, which I should add was presented to the court by Mr. Schiff in a performance that has received rave reviews. While we will not know the court's decision until this spring or summer, I'm cautiously optimistic that the court will, in fact, side with the Sacketts and that they will finally get their day in court. The Sacketts have stated that this case is not about their rights, that this case is about their rights as individuals and property owners and not about the merits of protecting the environment. They, like everyone in this room, want to protect the environment and the resources that make the West such a wonderful place to live and raise a family. But their plight raises serious questions about who we are as a country and what kind of government we want to have. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito captured this consideration perhaps best of all when, during the oral argument, he asserted that, and I quote, "Most ordinary homeowners would say that this couldn't happen in the United States." This is something that all of us should think about. As if the Sackett's case were not bad enough on its own, there's a similar, equally troubling case just a few short miles away from their property. In 2010, Jack Barron was found not guilty by a jury of his peers for filling wetlands on his property in advance of building a home there. After the trial, Mr. Barron had hoped to return to life as usual and enjoy his retirement, but he was instead notified that despite winning in a criminal court, he was still going to be pursued in a civil case by the authorities. And they are now faced with a major dilemma. Either comply with the EPA demands that they restore the property, or keep fighting the government and face fines of up to $37,500 a day. The Barrons, like most Idahoans, do not have unlimited means, and most of their retirement savings were spent defending themselves in criminal court. These circumstances present the very real possibility that they may lose their property. And this brings us again to the question framed by Justice Alito in the Sackett case. Did anyone ever imagine that this could or would happen in America? We are not here today to question the merits of protecting our environment. We all support clean air and water and the protection of our treasured landscape and resources. But we must be concerned when enforcement starts becoming an end unto itself and we start ignoring the impacts that arbitrary, heavy-handed federal enforcement can have on the lives of people and their communities. Today, we're going to hear example after example of that happening. Again, I want to thank our witnesses for attending this hearing, and I will at this time turn to Co-Chairman Representative Steve Pierce for any statement you would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Brasso, Senator Crapo, and Senator Roberts for all being here for this hearing, also Representative Bishop. The members of the Western Caucus, both Senate and House, are coming together to highlight the issues which are devastating the West and pulling the country's economy down right with it. Especially want to recognize Governor Otter, who's here today, longtime friend in the House of Representatives, moved on to better and bigger things and is doing a great job in his state there. He's one of the ones that sees firsthand the impact that the federal government's policies have on states' ability to balance their budgets. Since the Obama administration's inauguration in 2009, we've seen gas prices double, unemployment increase across the country, and our national debt skyrocket. The administration plan seems to be focused on making things worse, not better, whether it is through land grabs, proposed regulations, moratoriums on oil and gas production, or killing projects such as the Keystone XL pipeline. It's clear that this administration just does not understand the potential of the West to help our economy recover nationally. The states west of the Mississippi River offer so many solutions to the problems facing our country, yet the administration refuses to take the handcuffs off the job creators, and we see the constant effects of that. In my home state of New Mexico, we've seen how these policies have a devastating effect. We have a proposed listing of the Dunes sagebrush lizard, which would kill about 23,000 jobs across Texas and New Mexico. It will also destroy oil and gas production across the Permian Basin and would put at risk the first nuclear investment in this country in over 30 years, a nuclear enrichment plant that's just 17 miles south of my hometown. That $3 billion investment would be shut down because of the listing of this lizard. It's not that we don't want to protect the environment in the West, it's that we want the balance. We understand the need for clean air, clean water more than most, but we also understand the need to be able to make a living for our families. We also have a county in my district which is being sued. They have brought it to attention that the West is burning national forest down because of the Forest Service policies. And so one county stood up in the face of the federal government and said, we're going to start logging if you will not start logging. The New Mexico Constitution allows that, and now then the federal government has threatened to arrest the people there in that project and is suing the county to stop them from protecting our citizens in the national forest areas. We see how EPA overregulation is killing jobs and increasing the cost of electricity. Again, in New Mexico, the Four Corners Power Plant in northwestern New Mexico is going to shut down 3 of its 5 turbines, perfectly good turbines producing electricity, which are going to be required to shut down because of some ruling by the EPA. The San Juan Generating Station is also being affected seriously. At a time when we had rolling blackouts last year in New Mexico, we're shutting down electric generation. It just doesn't make sense. It's going to make electricity higher priced, more costly, kill jobs, and it will not do a thing to protect the environment. By educating and engaging the citizens across the West and across the nation, we can still win this fight. When informed and educated about some of these proposals, citizens across my district have rallied. We had almost 800 people show up at a rally regarding the Gila National Forest on the western side of my district. Had almost 1,000 people show up protesting the actions by the government and the enlisting of the dune sagebrush lizard, and almost 600 showed up to support the idea that we need to start cleaning up our national forests. We also need to continue to working together here in Washington. The Jobs Frontier report is full of concrete ideas how to protect and create jobs. To date, the House has passed 9 bills put forward in this report. However, the Democrat leadership in the Senate continues to refuse to move any jobs bills to correct the economy and economic problems that we face. We need to continue to apply pressure on Senator Reid and President Obama to move these bills and sign them in order to let the West reach its full potential and lead the nation back out of the economic malaise that we're in. Yield back the time, and thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Representative Pierce. We're going to let Senator Pat Roberts go next. He's got a hearing elsewhere that he's critically needed at and is going to have to excuse himself after his opening comments.
Well, thank you, Senator Crapo and or Chairman Crapo and members of the Western Caucus, more particularly Senator Barrasso and also Representative Pierce. Thank you for your comments, sir. Like Henry VIII said to one of his wives, I won't keep you long. Governor, I apologize for going ahead of you to introduce a good friend of mine. You're doing a great job out there in the West, and if I read your testimony, it says impacts of federal environmental and natural resources policies on economic development and property rights in the West. My comment on that to the federal government is simply, whoa, stop, quit. Put up a cost-benefit yardstick. Consider people's individual freedoms. The 2 examples brought forth by our distinguished chairman, who has always been a defender of property rights, or egregious example of property rights enforcement, and you really wonder, is this America? So thank you all for what you're doing. I do have to go back as the ranking Republican on the Ag Committee. We're holding the second of hearings. This is on conservation. We need a lot of consolidation in that effort. And so I got to get back to the sometimes powerful Senate Ag Committee, OK Corral, to make sure everything is peaceful. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to introduce a great friend of mine, Mark Knight, a gentleman sitting right over here, who is a cattleman extraordinaire to testify before us today. Mark Knight is a cattle feeder and a row crop farmer from Lyons, Kansas. And in his testimony, gentlemen and lady, he refers to multiple regulatory barriers. That means a whole bunch that are limiting growth in rural America, everything from rural dust to animal feeding, operation reports to limited burning in the Flint Hill region of Kansas. Mark's testimony goes on to list the Department of Agriculture's livestock marketing regulations, the recent Department of Labor agriculture proposal as even further deterrents to a successful and a prosperous life in farm country. Now, I've known his dad and I've known his mom for a long time, and I've known Mark for quite a bit of time. If there's ever an example of a young man who should be involved in agriculture and helping to feed this country in a troubled and hungry world, it is this gentleman right over here. And yet, as we walked out of the office yesterday, I said, how you doing? He said, you know, it's not fun anymore. It's not fun anymore. It's not a profession where I am enjoying myself. I like to think of myself as making a difference, but these egregious kind of regulatory examples, all this overkill that is happening in virtually every segment of our economy, but more especially in agriculture, that's really unfortunate. I mentioned that the Senate Ag Committee is about to start a hearing on conservation, but I'm going to review the testimony from all the witnesses today. I really appreciate your coming, and I really appreciate the efforts of Senator Barrasso and Senator Crapo and Congressman Pierce and all the rest of the people who are willing to come to this testimony. As we gear up to reauthorize the Farm Bill, hopefully we can give the USDA the necessary tools to help producers feed a growing and troubled world rather than building barriers that simply limit their success. I look forward to continuing to work with Mark and all the senators here in the Western Caucus to achieve this goal. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. My time is up. I thank you for yours. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. And next, we'll go to Representative Bishop.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say one thing quickly. First of all, apologize because I'm leaving you. Came in late so I can go early to offset it. But we have a hearing where I'm chairman over on the House side where Mr. Jarvis of the Park Service and Mr. Abbey from BLM are going to be presenting a bloated and horrific budget to us. Other than that, it's okay. And my job
We
is
need you over there.
Yeah, my job is to point those out. I do want to thank, first of all, my good friend Butch Otter for being here. He's doing a great job as governor, and he was a wonderful member of the House while you were here before you went to governor. And I also want to recognize and appreciate the appearance on the second panel of the mayor of my hometown in Brigham City, Mayor Fife. I do want to let you know that I'm here, and I appreciate what you do for us back home. And with that, I'll yield back and ask your leave to, and with my apologies.
Certainly, we appreciate you making
Orrin can do everything for me.
It's good to have cover, right? Thank you. And next, Senator John Barrasso.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I know that others are here, and I'm going to be here later on in the hearing, so perhaps if either former governor of Idaho, Risch, or Senator Hatch is in a more pinched time frame, we could go with one of them. Thank you.
All right. Senator Hatch?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Crapo. Butch, we're happy to have you here. I'll tell you, it's great to see you again. We're proud of you as governor of Idaho, and we know you're a true Westerner in every sense of the word. This is a very important hearing. It's an important follow-up to the late Frontier report that we put out last year, which highlighted a lot of areas where we're working to grow our economy in a responsible manner. I wish we were here to highlight something positive for the rest of the program, but unfortunately that's not the case. We're going to hear from people who have been deeply hurt by the extremist policies of this administration. We're experiencing a recession that is worse than we've seen in a generation, and we need to do everything we can to help create a climate that promotes business growth and job creation. Now, my state, the state of Utah, is no exception. I want to particularly welcome Mayor Dennis Fife from Brigham City, Utah. Brigham City has a lot of unemployment right now, and a lot of that is because of the irresponsible policies of this administration. Our mayor has a tremendous experience and a tremendous background, which will, I'm sure, be pointed out by our leaders here today. I want to thank you for coming, Mayor. I appreciate your willingness to be here today. Now, I don't want to take away any time from those of the witnesses, so I'll quit at this time. Just glad to see all of you here, and we're really pleased to have this hearing going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Hatch. And next, Representative Loomis.
Well, good morning, Governor. I'm Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming. Welcome. So pleased to have you here, espousing Western issues as well as you do, and helping us help Washington and the rest of the country understand the uniquenesses associated with our states that have so much federal land and therefore so many federal burdens associated with having that land, and trying to manage responsible growth economies in the face of only having control of about half of the land base in our states. You're doing a wonderful job of espousing those issues. When I get around to questioning, I'll want to visit with you about the success stories you've had with regard to your wolf management plan. As you know, in Wyoming, we are now wrestling with the opportunity to be able to take control and manage the wolf population responsibly in a way that is respectful to other large ungulates, as well as to our human and pet populations, but at the same time recognizes that this is a population we have to live with and manage responsibly. So your guidance and your thoughts about that, your counsel with regard to how Idaho has successfully implemented its wolf management plan will be something I look forward to questioning you about, hearing from you about. And again, welcome, Governor. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Representative Lummis. And next, Senator Jim Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Governor. It's important we have this hearing today as we continue to focus on private property rights. And really that is the whole problem with all of these issues, is the lack of respect for property rights in America today. This is the camel's nose in the tent. As soon as people believe they can regulate people's private property, they just continue to until you've lost a lot of the rights that you have in private property. So it's important that we keep the pressure on. It's important that we as Westerners underscore to the rest of the country how important private property rights are to all of us, and particularly those out west. Governor, we're glad to have you. For those of you who don't know, we're in the presence of greatness today. This governor is a person operating a budget and making it work. He's operating in a $2.5 billion budget. His predecessor, however, had a $3.5 billion budget. So that tells you what has had to happen in the states in order for the states to be managed properly. Governor Otter has done that. He's made it work. There's been very substantial cuts, but the state's credit rating is one of the best in America. It's operated as well as any state in the union, and I have no doubt that history will record that Governor Otter is one of the best two governors that the state of Idaho has ever had. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Jim. And next, Representative Raul Labrador.
Butch, good morning. It's great to have you here. I'm one who sits in the seat that you held, and you held very honorably, and it's a tremendous honor, as we have discussed many times. One of the biggest compliments that I have ever received in my political career is when people tell me that I remind them of a young Butch Otter. So that has always been something that has meant a lot to me, because I look up to you. I look up to the work that you do. As we get into the discussion, I want to talk to you a little bit about, as an executive branch member, as an executive, how do you deal with the EPA, and how can we most effectively deal with the EPA? That's been one of the most frustrating things for me here in Washington, D.C., to see how much power we have ceded to the EPA, how much power they have acquired over the last 20, 30 years. And I would like to have an in-depth discussion with you about that. Welcome, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Raul. And now we're going to turn to our first panel. I would remind our panelists, each of you, that you've been requested to keep your oral presentation to about 5 minutes. We don't have the clock running today, so if you start going a little bit long, you might hear me tap it up here. The reason for that is because we want to have a lot of time for the questions and the back and forth that will come in that part of the presentation. Really, Governor Otter kind of got a great introduction already by Senator Risch and Representative Labrador, and frankly, all of the other members here who know him. And I'll just add to that, that Idaho truly is, under your leadership, Governor, showing the way we should govern. I spent the last week in Idaho, along with my other colleagues from the delegation, extolling the fact that Idaho has a balanced budget in contrast to what we have here. And it has not come easily, as Senator Risch mentioned. You've had to make and take some very big steps, and I know that there has been a significant amount of pain in Idaho that came along with that. But you showed the leadership, and now Idaho is reaping the benefits of that leadership, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate your great leadership on resource issues, and I know that's what we're here mainly to talk about today. But Governor, the floor is yours, and please share with us your wisdom.
Thank you. I'm not sure I know how to turn these on anymore.
I'll bet you can get it done.
Well, I hit the talk button, but I don't. Oh, there it is. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry that Senator Roberts had to leave, because I've enjoyed my tenure with Sam Brombach, who is now was in the United States Senate and is now the governor of the state of Kansas. And obviously, Matt Mead and Gary Herbert have been great fellows and great partners in our efforts in the West. As chairman of the Western Governors Association this last year, we had the opportunity to work together. And certainly with the addition of Susana Martinez, I would tell you we've got a pretty good stable of leaders in the West. And on behalf of the state of Idaho, I want to thank Senator Crapo, Senator Brasso, and Representative Pierce and the members of the Western Caucus for this opportunity to communicate Idaho's concerns about the impacts of federal regulations on the natural resource policies and on economic development and property rights in the West. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here today. And let me also congratulate you that when I was in Congress and in the Western Caucus, I don't believe we ever had a joint hearing where we brought both sides of the rotunda together to work on problems like this so that we had a force going forward. So my congratulations to both of the chairmen from the Senate and also from the House. The United States government owns 63.8% of all the lands in the state of Idaho and manages nearly 3/4 of Idaho's forest. National forests occupy 40% of Idaho's land mass, more than any other state. Of the 20.2 million acres of national forests in Idaho, over 4 million acres have been designated by Congress as wilderness areas and reserves. Another 8.4 million acres are currently without roads. The conflicting patchwork of federal laws, guidance, and policies associated with federal land management has absolutely led to gridlock. The health of our national forests has declined significantly, while the risks of catastrophic wildfire grow each year. Jobs, local communities, and the health of the forest products industry have all been significantly impacted by the sharp decline of forest management and timber harvesting on our national forests over the last 20 years. The Endangered Species Act listings and designations of critical habitat based on outdated and limited scientific information create significant management and economic burdens on private and other state lands. The listing of slickspot peppergrass is a prime example of such a listing. The proposed listing of the woodland caribou is another example. Federal introduction of wolves and the increased financial burden placed on the states constitutes an unfunded mandate. Instead of reducing federal funding for wolf management, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and Congress should be exploring a long-term funding mechanism to mitigate this federal action. Mitigation should include long-term funding for enhanced ungulate and wolf management. Livestock producers should be reimbursed for confirmed and probable livestock losses. Our ranchers depend on the access to public lands for livestock grazing in many cases. These ranches serve as the economic lifeblood of rural communities in Idaho. Wildlife concerns are frequently cited as the reason to permanently displace multiple generation ranch families, while at the same time invasive species and noxious weeds continue to go unchecked. Cheatgrass and other invasive noxious weeds replace sagebrush ecosystems following a devastating wildfire. In 11 western states, sage grouse has now been designated warranted but precluded species due to higher listing priorities under the Endangered Species Act. Although the process is just underway, it can be expected to have an impact on our ranching communities once it's complete. The current administration does not appear to be receptive toward the concept of promoting grazing as a viable and cost-effective tool to prevent greater sage grouse habitat fragmentation and loss despite grazing being a low priority threat. Wildfire frequently and severely has increased over the past decade, and federal mandatory rest period policy following a fire has increased the invasiveness of cheatgrass and other undesirable non-native species. There has been growing frustration regarding the continued reduction of funding from the federal agencies for weed control. The reduction in federal weed control funding creates a resource concern and an issue of fundamental fairness because federal agencies are responsible for a vast majority of land masses in the West. An emerging and very serious threat to Idaho is the spread of aquatic invasive species. Quagga and zebra mussels have migrated west from the Great Lakes region at an alarming rate. Despite the common pathway for migration being the interstate highway system, nothing is being done on the federal level to mitigate this threat. Lake Mead, managed by the National Park Service, is infested with quaggas. And when asked for cooperation in coordinating inspections and boat decontamination, the NPS has simply been apathetic. In Idaho, my approach to state regulations favors education and empowerment over prescription and punishment. However, the current administration places an unprecedented emphasis on the aggressive regulatory approaches to leverage penalties in order to force producers' compliance. When it comes to environmental laws, the Obama administration has shifted the burden onto our industries to prove their innocence. Nothing illustrates this more plainly than the broad sweeping changes in the Clean Water Act implementations. Environmental Protection Agency is looking to promulgate rules expanding the definition of waters of the U.S., which could have a significant impact on all the states. Historically, Idaho rural communities rely on timber harvest, mining, and grazing on the forest and BLM lands. However, due to the severe impacts of federal decision adversely impacting rural economies, recreation on public lands has been identified as the new economic resource to make up for the loss of traditional renewable resources and extraction. However, federal land policies decisions continue to threaten recreation-based economy that now is relied on by our rural communities. Forest Service travel plans revisions in Idaho have resulted in a net loss of motorized recreation trail miles measuring in the thousands of miles. Nearly 18,000 miles of designated trails exist in Idaho. However, 2/3 of that is exclusively opened to non-motorized travel. One of the most challenging issues in Idaho and other states with a high percentage of federal ownership is public school funding. At statehood, the federal government agreed that 5% of the proceeds from the sale of federal lands would go to benefit public education. As you know, the federal government no longer sells lands. Also, local governments cannot assess property taxes on public lands. Counties in Idaho, like Idaho County, where federal ownership is 80% of their land mass, are losing millions of dollars each year due to the high levels of federal ownership. With the extreme reduction in timber harvests in our national forest, the counties are not realizing the royalty revenues from timber extraction. Lastly, at statehood, the federal government transferred lands to Idaho, and an endowment trust was established for public schools. Since some of these endowment lands are surrounded by federal lands, it is difficult to maximize the revenues of these lands as mandated by the Idaho Constitution. Clean water and species protections are essential to the quality of life and the health of Idaho citizens. No one understands this better than our industries in Idaho and you folks sitting on this panel. However, federal environmental laws rarely recognize the unique and special conditions faced in the West. We need more flexibility, more local control and regulations that are tailored to the natural characteristics of our western states. For the economic future of Idaho and its sister states in the West, federal land management must provide balance in the management of these lands and respect the individuals and the individuality of the various states and the citizens and the impact that their decisions has on both. Thank you once again for this opportunity to appear before your council. Also, I want to congratulate you once again for this joint hearing. I'm ready to stand for questions.
Thank you, Governor, and also thank you for your extensive written testimony, which we will carefully review. And I should say to all the witnesses, your written testimony will be made a part of the record of this hearing. We're going to go first with Representative Lemus.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your accommodation of my schedule. I serve on the subcommittee of appropriations that your fine Representative Mike Simpson is chairing, and consequently I'm torn between two Idahoans today, yourself and my chairman, Mr. Simpson, and naturally I will be deferring to my chairman. So before I leave, I would ask you to comment on the relationship between litigation, endangered species, federal land management, and particularly forests. And I ask the question in this context. I served previously on Wyoming's Board of Land Commissioners and as the interim director of the Office of State Lands. So I had the opportunity to evaluate the health of state forests versus federal forests, of state land versus federal lands, and was aware of considerable differences in the health when state lands being more actively managed, as well as having tremendous partnerships between our lessees, state land lessees, managing to a standard versus the federal government, which is managing by command and control dictated from Washington. And I really felt strongly that those species, those lands, those forests that were managed by the state, the people who live there, the people who genuinely care about the future of those properties, was higher than our neighbors on federal lands. Do you find that to be true in Idaho as well? And could you comment on how we can help our eastern neighbors understand that state management and private management is not only more cost-effective, but produces a higher quality environment for the further propagation of species, both plant and animal? And thank you, Governor, for your comments today.
Representative, thank you for that question. And I would tell you, I spent 6 frustrating years here trying to explain to my colleagues east of the Mississippi River exactly what kind of problems we were having in the West and how some of the decisions that are made here in Washington, D.C., some by Congress, but mostly by the power to enforce clause of almost every bill that's passed here. The director shall promulgate and the secretary shall promulgate such rules and regulations necessary to carry out the provisions of this act. So I feel almost inadequate, even after my 6 years of being here, of being able to answer the second part of your question. However, let me just point to a couple of things. I'm an old businessman and I'm a numbers guy. And I can tell you that in Idaho, we have out of our endowment lands that we manage for, under our constitutional direction, we manage for 9 different beneficiaries, the largest of which is our public schools. Off of roughly 1 million acres, we grant to our public schools $32 million a year off of that 900,000 acres or 1 million acres. If we had that same kind of result off of the 20 million acres that we have of federal land, you do the numbers. And so, you know, when you're talking $600 million, you're talking a $500 million, which, by the way, would be almost 1/3 of the monies that I dedicate to public schools, K through 12, in Idaho. So the numbers themselves speak, but also the reproduction. Idaho operates our forest lands under a sustainable yield. So we cut a tree about every 22 to 28 years. Depending upon whether it's on a north slope or a south slope. And, you know, I can't tell you what the rotation is at the federal lands, but I can tell you that the federal government and their land policies on our forest reserves in the state of Idaho are entertaining a catastrophe. It was about 100 years ago right now that the Great Fire burned through the West. The only thing that stopped the fire in Idaho was when it got to Wyoming and Montana. And it crossed the rivers and burned on into those states. Most of the species that replaced that just happened to be lodgepole pine. Lodgepole pine has a natural life of between 80 and 120 years. The result is, folks, we've got a devastating fire coming at us, not as a result of any bug kill, which we have a lot of, not as any result of any disease, which we have a lot of, but because of natural death of that forest. And it's coming at us. It was 100 years ago, right now, when we had that great fire, and it's going to be coming at us again. The health of our forest is directly related to the health of the habitat, which is related to the health of the fish and game within our state and the habitat within our state. And so we manage the Idaho forest well. We do a great job at it. As I showed you the numbers, I wish that the federal government managed theirs as well.
Thank you, Governor. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you very much for your courtesy.
Thank you very much. And we welcome Representative Gosar from Arizona joining us. Senator Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Otter, I have a lot of admiration for you. Known you before you were a congressman. Loved you as a congressman and now as a governor. I just have one question for you, and that basically is this. I personally want to thank you for the work that you've done with regard to wolf delisting. You know we're doing all we can to keep wolves out of our state of Utah. And as we do that, can you give us an idea of the relationship with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? Do your state wildlife managers have the ability to manage the way they need to manage with regard to wolves and other items as well?
When wolves were introduced in 1995, Idaho resisted that introduction, as did Wyoming, as did Montana. But we were assured that once we got 10 packs per state, or roughly 120 to 150 wolves per state, delisting would be the next step in that program. Idaho right now has well over 1,000 wolves in Idaho. In 2002, that program was amended to say if you get 30 packs within the Rocky Mountain region, we will then, which would be 350 to 400 wolves, we will then delist. And it took us all these years, all this effort of broken promises by the federal government, who sought to introduce the Canadian gray wolf into the old Rocky Mountain timber wolf regions of the West. We put together a program in 2009 where we decided that we split the state up into regions. Mostly they were elk regions, because we saw the great impact that it had on our elk. Let me give you just one example. The Lolo region, which is not too far from where Lewis and Clark took their great adventure from the East Coast to the West Coast. We had at one time the Rocky Mountain elk treasure there. Whenever somebody wanted to establish elk, they would come to Idaho. We would help them trap a few elk, and they could start their elk herds in other states and in other countries, by the way. At one time, our numbers there were 16,000 elk. After the introduction of the wolf, I would tell you today that we have less than 2,000 elk in that region. Because we have just absolutely been devastated. And people will tell you, well, the wolves don't take down the elk. Quite frankly, they do. Or they'll only take the sick or the old. They do. But the other thing they do is they stress the elk herds. And stressed mother elk will not impregnate, because they're being chased, they're being dislocated from their previous habitat, and as a result of that, the devastation to our large ungulate herds, primarily the Rocky Mountain elk, has just been devastating. At one time in Idaho, we had nearly 5,000 outfitters and guides whose business was to make sure folks from other states that wanted to come to Idaho and enjoy a hunt and also take a trophy elk. We have now less than 2,000 outfitters and guides in the state of Idaho. So to our economy, to our natural habitat, to our great pride in our large game herds, it has been devastating. We are, as you know, and thanks to Congress and the addition of an amendment on a continuing resolution, we now have a wolf hunt going on in Idaho. Montana's just closed. And we've been very responsible in that. We're going to maintain those limited numbers for a sustainable wolf count in the state of Idaho. Primarily, because we want wolves? No, not necessarily. But because we know that if we drop below a certain number in Idaho, the federal government will come back in and take over the management of the wolves. And we've already had an experience with their management. We'd rather have ours.
Well, thank you, Governor. We've had a similar experience in Utah as well. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. Representative Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Governor, thanks again for your testimony today. One of the comments that we often hear is that wilderness areas will create massive amounts of tourism. I find that to be less than provable. One of the oldest wilderness areas, the Gila Wilderness in western New Mexico, about 1 million acres, one of the first to actually be listed as wilderness, and yet the region is as economically stressed as it always has been. Are you finding you all have even more wilderness than we do? Are you finding that wilderness is a great revenue generator for the state?
Well, thank you, Representative. First off, we have the largest contiguous wilderness in the continental United States, other than Alaska, who obviously has a lot more than Idaho, God bless them. And I would tell you that there is some recreational activity going on in the wilderness areas, but you have to remember there's only one way you can get into that wilderness, because you can't take motorized vehicles in there, you can't take four-wheelers in there. In some cases, you're limited on the kind of equestrian traffic that is into a wilderness area. I want to remind you of one thing. The Frank Church River of No Return area, which is the largest wilderness that we have in the continental United States, was part of that 1912 fire. And it's laying directly in the path of that. So no matter how folks want to recreate in that, it's also at risk, primarily because of not only the health of the forest itself, but the endangered and invasive and noxious weeds that are going. Those become fine fuels. Idaho, it's not unusual for us during storm season throughout the year to have 1,400 lightning strikes a night in Idaho. All those are high peaks, inaccessible by any way to battle a wildfire. And I would tell you it is a big threat, not only to the health of the forest itself and the inhabitants of that forest, our wildlife, but also to the watershed. Because if all the money that we have spent over the last, I can't tell you how many years, on salmon recovery, in a lot of those reaches, that's where the spawning beds are. And if we silt those up with ash, if we silt those up with runoff as a result of destroying by wildfire the structure that now holds those soils in places, we're going to wipe out billions of dollars of money that we have put into salmon recovery.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have another question, but I'll yield back, and then if we get a chance for a second round, I'll ask it. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Representative Lummis's frustration in dealing with other legislators who don't understand what the West is like. And frequently you'll run into legislators who, when you tell them that over 60% of the land in Idaho is owned by the federal government, they have real trouble conceiving that, particularly when the Constitution says that every state will be admitted on equal footing with every other state. It turns out that some states are more equal than others, it appears. So, Governor Otter, thanks so much for coming here. I think I'm going to pass on the questioning and give it to other people. Butch and I get lots of chances to talk, so if I got any questions, we'll talk about it. But you're doing a great job, Governor. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Representative Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was a little bit late, so I don't know if this has already been done, but I'd like to welcome also the First Lady from the state of Idaho, Lori Otter. And also, since quagga mussels were mentioned, I'd like to also welcome Eric Anderson, State Representative from Idaho from Priest Lake, who we affectionately called in the legislature Representative Quagga Mussel because of his great desire to save the waterways of Idaho, and I thank him for the work that he has done. Butch, how do you think the EPA could work more effectively? I know that's a broad question, but you've had your experience 6 years here in Congress, a long time as the Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, and now as the two-term Governor of Idaho. What do you think we could do here at the congressional level, too?
Raul, Congressman Labrador, I've been waiting for this opportunity to explain wherever you're from. I've been waiting to say that all morning.
That didn't work out for the last time.
I've got another story to tell you later on about my last couple of days' experience here in Idaho, and I'll share that with you later. Raul, I found out in Idaho that if you can turn agencies that have regulatory powers and authoritative powers over certain things that happen in the private sector, over certain things that happen with private property owners, like the Caucus, and turn that to how we can do things, how we can move forward, rather than punishment and prescription of stopping them from doing things. with the DEQ, with the Department of Environmental Quality in Idaho, which works closely with the Environmental Protection Agency. We can come to agreements many times with whether it's clean air, which we have primacy over in Idaho. We do not have primacy over clean water. We have not sought to take primacy over that. However, I would tell you in the legislature this year, we do have a bill working its way through the legislature that would take over primacy for Idaho's water. So we have Idaho citizens making decisions about Idaho problems rather than waiting on somebody to come in from either Seattle at Region 10 or from Washington, D.C. But if we could change the mindset, and I know it's going to be impossible. When I first came to Congress, I was on government reform. I was the chairman of the subcommittee in oversight on the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, two of my favorite agencies. And I was told one day, they said, Congressman, we were here before you got here. We will be here after you leave. You need to learn very quickly while you are here who is actually running the Environmental Protection Agency. And so we've lost control of it. It's out of control. And so long as they have the power to enforce clause in their enabling legislation that says that they shall promulgate the rules and regulations, there's no other way to stop or at least slow down and change that mindset except financially. And so I'm not one of those that just looks at it and say, starve the beast. But I would tell you that until they change the mindset of working with people to make things happen instead of prohibition and stopping things from happening, you're not going to change the actions of the Environmental Protection Agency or any federal agency here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. One of the first things I did when I was elected to Congress is I read the book The Big Burn by Timothy Egan, and they talk about the fire of 1910 that you just mentioned. And another thing that I did is I went on a helicopter ride in north central Idaho, and I looked at the state-owned land, at the federal land, and at the private lands. And there was, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to do that.
I have.
And there's a huge difference when you look at the forests, when you look at state-owned lands versus federal lands. And it's amazing to me how you can see the decay and the rot that the different trees have, and it's mostly on federal lands. And if you look at our state lands, they're actually well managed. They actually look healthy. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you have done that at the state level, and why it is that we have such a stark difference between state lands and federal lands?
In 1990, when I was still lieutenant governor in my old congressional district, in your congressional district, we had over 65 lumber mills in that district alone. And I think we had 5 or 6 in the 2nd congressional district. Today, there's 1 in the 2nd congressional district, and there's less than 35 in the 1st congressional district. And even though they've gone through a lot of rehabilitation in those lumber mills, even though they've added a lot of technology and new innovation, one of the things that they haven't done is maintain the larger carriages within those mills. So all the new mills that are being built, all the new money, all the new capital that's going into place in our lumber mills, and most of them have to be about half a million board feet a day. In order to be the right economic size. Most of those mills now only have a carriage that can take a 28-inch log, 28 inches in diameter. And so the large logs, which grow every day, are going to have to find practically someplace else to go because we only have 4 out of all of our mills that can now take over a 28-inch log in the United States. So number one, the larger logs are worth a lot less money, even though they'll yield a lot more. They're going to have to go, depending upon the cost of transportation. They're either going to have to go over to Oregon, where there's some old mills with a large log, or they're going to have to go overseas. Because we simply don't have the capacity anymore to cut those. So if we ever did get to a point where we could manage the federal forest the same way we manage state forest for that sustainable yield cut that we have. When I became governor, we were cutting 112 million board feet a day off of state lands. Today, it's something like 245, because we had to move that up because some of those trees were growing faster than our silviculturists originally told us that they were going to grow. So we have moved that up for a couple of reasons. Number one is we didn't want the logs to get too big. Number two, we wanted to maintain a healthy forest. A healthy forest should be described on a south slope of about 120 square feet, basal measurement they call it, per acre. On a south slope, because that's where the sun shines and it evaporates the moisture faster. On a north slope, more like 140. On a lot of the federal land in Idaho, there's over 600 basal measurement per acre. We try to keep ours within that parameter that I spoke to earlier of a healthy forest, 120 to 140 feet. There's probably going to be some discussion. I would hope there would be some discussion of letting the states become the stewards and let the states also be able to reap the benefits for our local schools, for our local communities off of those forests. We also had a trade policy. Under NAFTA, we didn't regulate that as well as we were promised. They have not regulated that as well as we were promised. So we got a lot of competition coming in from Canada for a while there. In fact, there were about 4 years where we were in the marketplace, we were absolutely devastated because we had all that forest coming in, all those forest products, coming in from Canada. Why? Because in Canada, it's the provinces that control the timber cut, that control the health of the forest. In the United States, it's the U.S. Forest Service.
Well, Governor, I share your concern about having another 100-year fire. If you look at those federal forests, they're decaying. You have a bunch of timber, a bunch of little grasses and things, and eventually it's going to catch fire, and it's going to be devastating to Idaho and to the American economy. So I hope we can work on something. And we are working in the Natural Resources Committee trying to introduce an amendment to the SRS, the Secure Rural Schools legislation, that would allow Idaho to have a pilot project so we can actually manage our own timberlands.
Great.
So hopefully we can get that inserted in there. So thank you.
Bear in mind, too, that the invasive species and the noxious species that are constantly moving into the federal forest where they're not controlled become the ladder fuels. So no matter how old that forest is, if you get weeds high enough and brush high enough, they'll ladder up into those taller trees, and that's when the fire crowns out, blows up, and it can be absolutely devastating. Those old forests, when they do burn, are going to calcine the earth anywhere from probably 12 to 18 inches deep, which means they burn all of the nutrients out of the soil profile. Nothing will grow. Slate Creek, Idaho, which is on the reaches of the St. Joe River, burned in 1910. Today, there's still areas in Slate Creek where nothing grows because it was so overgrown, had so much fuel, and it burnt the earth so deep, they've never been able to replace those nutrients, naturally or artificially.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gosar.
Governor Otter, thanks for your testimony and thanks for coming today. We're just trying to get into our forest down in Arizona, so it's not a matter of just being able to cut 28 inches. It's trying to just get in and cutting. That's our biggest problem. Having two of the largest fires in this last 2 years, you bring up an idea, and it comes up with the scenario of coordination. How do we base that coordination? Forest Service seems to be very slow, almost inept by a number of reasons. How do you think a coordination looking at the state forester could work? How do you think that scenario could be streamlined?
Well, we have a contract with the federal government for firefighting and initial attack in Idaho. I was an old hotshot crew. Remember when I was in college? In the summertime, we were part of the initial attack hotshot crews that went out. When we had a fire in those days, you went out and attacked it and you put it out. I would say the average fire on private land in Idaho is probably less than 500 acres. The average fire on state land in Idaho is probably less than 1,000 acres. I couldn't even begin to approach to tell you the average fire size on federal land because they don't have an initial attack and won't permit us to do so, even though with all the federal inholdings that we have of our state lands, we got section 36 and 16 out of every township when we became a state. Under Senator Risch's statement, in our Organic Act, it says Idaho is admitted to the Union in all respects whatsoever with all of the original states. Quite frankly, there are some, as the senator said, some are more equal than others. But if we could just go in, if we could have permission to go in on those initial attacks without having to file all kinds of permits, it's not just with the Forest Service, it's in all of our natural resources. My first few months as governor, we experienced the Murphy Complex fire, which started in Utah, burnt through part of Nevada, and then 700,000 acres of desert lands, by the way, sage grouse habitat, bull trout habitat, slick spot peppergrass habitat in the state of Idaho. And the result was absolutely devastating. We could have stopped that had they allowed now Senator Brackett, a great rancher out in the Bruno Breaks area. If he would have been allowed to go in and plow the fire lines that he needed to, we could have stopped that fire at less than 5,000 acres. We would not have lost all of that habitat. We wouldn't have had to go through the expense of rebuilding it. So just be a good partner. You know, if my neighbor's house caught on fire, I'd go over and help him put it out. He wouldn't have to call me up and he wouldn't have to give me permission to do that. I would go do that. That's the way we have always done things in the West. That's what built the West was families caring for other families, individuals caring for other individuals. And if they would recognize that we're a partner rather than the king, a king and serf relationship here, I think we could stop a lot of the problems. And not only just on the fires themselves, but on the pre-designation. If we could go in and knock down some of those invasive weeds, some of those noxious weeds, some of those fine fuels that become the spark for the lightning strike, there's just an awful lot, Representative, that we could do if we would just put together a partnership.
And I think you bring up the next part is that when we start talking about coordination and working with the federal government and working with states, has to do with the endangered species, and we need some tort reform. When you were talking about elk herds, boy, I'm originally from western Wyoming. Nothing's been more impacted than the moose herds, the Shiras moose herds in Wyoming from the wolves. I mean, we're getting down to catastrophic levels where hunting quotas are less than half of what they used to be 10 years ago. So, you know, given that scenario, we need to have some type of skin in the game from the environmental communities as well, because I know the Forest Service and some of the government agencies have their hands tied, particularly in regards to these environmental reforms. One quick last question. You know, you've had to deal with the wolves in Idaho. You know, we're struggling in New Mexico and Arizona in regards to reintroduction of the gray wolf. Can you give us any insights on how you would try to handle that?
I should have, in response to your first question, I can't imagine anybody keeping Jan Brewer from doing anything that she doesn't want to do. She's a tough lady, and I really appreciate her partnership in our Western efforts. Yes, we have to take a new look at the Endangered Species Act because it is broken. It turned from an effort to recover certain species that were being threatened or endangered. It turned from that to one of prescription and prevention and penalties. And there's no partnership in a relationship like that. The other thing that I would hope that you would look at is the Equal Access to Justice Act. That has been one of the most misused by the court systems, and I think they need some direction, just like you gave them direction on the wolves. That has been one of the most misused efforts to try to create equality between litigants, that when one side loses, they have to pay the winning side. And it seems like that always works out pretty well unless a judge bifurcates an issue on his judgment and then will award to the winning side all the money and nothing to the losing side. In most of our efforts that we've been in court under the Endangered Species Act and the resulting request under the Equal Access to Justice Act, the state of Idaho has always been the payee.
Thank you, Governor.
Payor.
Thank you, and we've been joined by Representative Corey Gardner, and I understand you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Governor Otter, welcome. I live in the great state of Colorado, and we face many of the same challenges that you face in Idaho. One of the things that we have seen move more and more toward on the rulemaking side is, you just mentioned the Equal Access to Justice Act. What we're seeing is settlements, litigations, rules being driven by litigation, or perhaps even it's more insidious than that, where you have people who may want a particular rule to go forward, but there's no will in Congress to do it, and so they may not present the strongest argument in court, and lo and behold, the court says that they must do something, and then the rule comes forward, and Congress is then stuck with the rule from the administration that Congress doesn't support, but the administration and those within it support. What are your thoughts on perhaps Congress taking back more of its authority that it's ceded over the past several hundred years when it comes to entering into settlements and the litigation settlements that occur, which drive rulemaking?
Many times we find, obviously in this area, but in several other areas, whether it's in labor or whether it's in the EPA, a lot of times we will see the agency and the Justice Department not fight the court case, but settle it. And as a result of that settlement, the judge then rules that the other side won, and it actually becomes the de facto rule that we all have to live with. So, I think you're right on. I think you have to take back an awful lot more of the responsibility for the rules that are actually, we're making more decisions in the courtroom than we are in the forest. We're making more decisions in the courtroom than we are out in the habitat areas about the rules and the regulations that we have to live with. And it's unfortunate, but that's the mess we're in. And I think a cleanup of a renewal, if you will, of the Endangered Species Act, and a renewal of some of the administrative powers that those folks have. Probably a new look at the agencies themselves that have the enforcement power, and Congress taking back control and giving a little more direct direction to those agencies.
Thank you, and Governor Otter, I will ask the last question of you in this panel, and then we'll release you and let you get back. I think you're headed back to Idaho today.
I am.
Makes me jealous, but I'll ask the last question. I just want to follow. I know the answer to this question, but I want to give you an opportunity to.
Well, of course you do.
Put
You're a
the
lawyer.
answer on the question on the table. A number of years back, when we were trying to reform the Endangered Species Act and several others to give greater management authority to states, and whether it be under the Endangered Species Act or, as you've talked today about, our management of the forest or the wolves, the question often put is, can we move management authority under a number of these different laws back to the states? The response we got at the time that I'm thinking about, this was back in the mid-90s when we had a very strong push for reform of the act. The response that we got at that time, which actually stopped us from being successful in Congress, was that the states are not committed to protecting the environment and are not committed to the kind of multiple use management that will assure that we perpetually have these tremendous environmental heritages protected and maintained, and B, that the states do not have the expertise that the federal government has to be able to manage, whether it be the forests or any other aspects of our resources. I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that, to both of those arguments.
We find just the contrary. In fact, a lot of times when we're asked on a proposed rule and we're asked for input, who do they come to and ask for input? They come to our state agencies. My Fish and Game is probably just as professional and just as scientifically capable of arriving at a decision as anybody. Their whole budget depends upon the success and the amount of fish and wildlife that we have in the state, because the only money they get nothing from the general fund. All they get is how many fishing licenses and how many hunting licenses and what kind of activity in that industry that they can increase, that they can incur. And so it's actually, Senator, it is just the opposite. Or are they just being nice to us and saying, well, you know, we're going to have to listen to them vent, or that's something? I think there are some agencies that are very sincere in that. And I would have to tell you that I find Secretary Salazar being very receptive to all kinds of input. We just put together our task force on sage grouse. And as a result of the Wyoming experience and the success that they had in putting theirs together, which was a protocol that was established by then Governor Risch on the roadless rule, on the roadless plan in Idaho, the only roadless plan that we have actually in operation in the United States today. Our state agencies do care. We live there. We've raised generations of folks in Idaho. They're born on those watersheds. They're born on those resources. Many of them toil for a living all their lives. They raise families there. And many of them are buried on that same watershed and in those same resource areas. We do care about it. I've always been struck, even when I was in Congress, by the folks that say, well, no, we want to put wolves in Idaho, or we want to put this, or we want to do that, because we think it's great for the nation. But yet they don't want to put them in their state. They want to put them in some other state. I hear from environmental groups all over the United States when we started our wolf hunt, our very successful wolf hunt, that why was I killing all those wolves and how beautiful they were. And you respond back to them and say, when was the last time you came to Idaho, spent some money to look at a wolf? I can tell you the answer to that. If they're so great, then why don't they want them in their own state? When Congressman Simpson and I were working together in Congress, as you might recall, with tongue in cheek, we wanted to reintroduce wolves into the Adirondacks. And the resistance, we couldn't even get the bill printed. The resistance was pretty stiff. So if they're so great, why don't we put them in their state?
Well, thank you, Governor. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
I knew the answer to the question, but I wanted to let one of our strong governors get a chance to put the response to that question on the record. Governor, we'd all like to go on longer, but we've got to move ahead with the next panel. We appreciate you taking the time, and I know the commitment that it took for you to be here. And we appreciate not only your being here, but your strong, solid leadership in Idaho and in the West. And
Thank you.
Again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And now we'll call up our second panel. Our second panel is composed of Mr. and Mrs. Mike and Chantel Sackett from Idaho, and they're putting out the name tags. Let's have to see where they place them out here for you. Damian Schiff, Senior Attorney with Pacific Legal Foundation. Mr. Dr. Dennis Fife, Mayor of Brigham City, Utah. Mark Knight, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Kansas Livestock Association. And Buster Johnson, the Chairman of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors in Arizona. And as witnesses are finding their chairs, I will remind everybody we do have a full panel, and these issues are such that we like to get into a lot of questions and answers and discussion with you. Your written testimony will be made a part of the record, and we encourage you to remember to try to keep your time to 5 minutes. Now, since the clocks aren't working in front of you, if you get going a little long, I might just kind of give a little tap here to remind you to try to keep it to 5 minutes. I know that the 5 minutes is going to run out before you've run out of things you want to say to us, but we will get opportunities as we get into the questions and answers for you to clarify and expand upon your presentations. And with that, Mike and Chantel, between the two of you, you want to decide who goes first and how we're going to approach your testimony?
Michael, just read.
All right, Mike, please proceed.
Good morning. I'm Mike Sackett. This is my wife, Chantel. We are from Priest Lake, and we are grateful to be invited here today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about regulatory abuse as we have experienced it firsthand. We welcome the chance to share our impression of how the regulatory abuse hurts individuals, families, communities, and the economy as a whole. We have told our story many times before, but it's worth giving the outline again, because it's a warning to all Americans that are at risk if regulators are allowed to do whatever they please with no accountability, regardless of the effect on people's lives, their rights, and on the economy. Environmental protection is an important cause, one we strongly believe in, but regulators need to be able to justify their actions both in the legal sense and in the environmental sense. They cannot be a law unto themselves. Our story's not complicated. We are small business owners. We've always wanted to live on the shores of Priest Lake, but we're not able to afford to buy waterfront property. When a small parcel became available 500 feet from the lake, we bought it for $23,000. We wanted to build a 3-bedroom house, and we had every reasonable expectation that this would be possible. The lot was purchased and is zoned in a residential subdivision. And it includes a sewer hookup. There are houses on 2 adjacent lots and county roads on 2 sides. So we went to our local Bonner County and got the building permit checklist. We compiled the whole process. We were issued our building permit and we started working on our lot. But after we started laying gravel, 3 federal officials showed up without notice of or warning of any kind, and they told us they thought that we were building on a wetland. There had to be some mistake because there is no standing water on our land and no water flowing off of it, and we had all of our local building permits. The 3 federal officials had no paperwork of any kind, either to stop the work on our lot or any proof that our lot was in a wetland. What was also shocking was the way the EPA treated us. For 7 months, despite our repeated requests, they didn't send us anything in writing telling us what we had done wrong. And then we got issued the so-called compliance order. We were ordered to put the site back the way it was, plant wetlands plants that were not native to the site, and maintain the property for 3 to 5 years. The cost of complying would have been tens of thousands of dollars, but the cost of not complying is literally $75,000 a day, a terrifying threat. We knew that our land was not wetlands, and we wanted to make our case and get somebody to listen, but the EPA refused our request for a hearing. And the EPA and the Ninth Circuit said we cannot appeal directly to the court. We would first have to go through a long and expensive wetlands permit process and be denied. So this is why we are before the United States Supreme Court right now. The oral argument was held on January 9th. Damian Schiff, our attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, asked the court to recognize that property owners have the right to appeal when EPA declares their land to be wetlands and takes over their land. Our case is about constitutional rights, but this panel today is about regulations and the economy. So here is something I would really like to share with you that is important. When EPA invaded our lives, it didn't just trample our plans of our home, and it isn't just robbing us of sleep and peace of mind by threatening us with unimaginable fines. It also deprived other small businesses an opportunity for honest work, from the people who would frame the walls, install the plumbing, the flooring, windows, roof, and heating, to the people who would have provided the materials. It has made it almost impossible for our small business to have any banking relationship due to the fines threatened by the EPA. We've had employees leave due to the threat of the EPA imposing these multi-million-dollar fines. Now, multiply our experience by hundreds, if not thousands per year. EPA issues thousands of wetlands compliance orders every year, and like us, the landowners cannot appeal them directly to court. So we don't know how many of these orders are based on real environmental facts or superficial, shoddy drive-by reviews, as in our case. In our case, EPA never did any testing on our property before ordering us to stop work and walk away from our dreams. At the oral argument, Justice Alito said this was outrageous, and we agree. While we can't know whether EPA's wetlands compliance orders are well-grounded, we do know that they stop people from using their property, and that destroys jobs. From what we can see based on our own experience, EPA has to be one of America's most efficient job-killing machines. One more thing. Since our case started getting national publicity, we have been hearing from people all across this great country that are caught in similar situations. They are under threat from EPA or other federal regulatory agencies, and they don't believe that they've done anything wrong. They can't afford to fight back against agencies with unlimited funds, and there are procedural obstacles in the way, as in our case. And these people are scared, and that's what we've heard over and over and over again, fear. So yes, Chantel and I are fighting for ourselves, but bigger than that we are fighting for everyone in this country who owns property, large or small. We believe property owners have the constitutional rights, and the EPA should not be able to get away with destroying people's lives, jobs, and economy while answering to nobody but itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel and Mike. Dame, yes,
Chairman, could I say something out of order?
you may, Representative Labrador.
You know, I just got to know the Sacketts here very recently, just over the last year, and I am so impressed. And I think hopefully they will be successful in the Supreme Court, and if they are, I think years from now, we will be hearing about the Sacketts and their great effort. You know, I came up on a quote here recently from one of our founding fathers, one of our great patriots, says, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests." That's Patrick Henry. And I think the fight that the Sacketts have engaged in is to remind us once again. Many of us ran for office saying that we wanted to stand up and defend the Constitution. They have actually done it, and I just want to thank them for what they have done in their fight.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Raul. And agreed. Damien.
Thank you, Senator, and other distinguished members of this panel for this opportunity to speak to you today about how we can protect the environment without endangering our economy. I am an attorney with Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a legal watchdog organization that fights for private property rights and a balanced approach to environmental regulation. Our caseload at PLF is heavy, unfortunately, because environmental regulations in this country are seriously out of balance. Time and again, environmental mandates are issued that undermine private property rights and therefore postpone economic recovery for all of us without any clear environmental benefit. Americans have become familiar with one outrageous case, that of Mike and Chantel Sackett, who are represented by attorneys at Pacific Legal Foundation in the U.S. Supreme Court. But the Sacketts are victims of abuse under the Clean Water Act, but other environmental statutes demand attention as well, including, as has already been mentioned this morning, the Endangered Species Act. One misguided ESA crusade is well known, that of the draconian water restrictions that were imposed on California's San Joaquin Valley over these last several years. These cutbacks in 2009 and 2010 idled hundreds of thousands of otherwise fertile and productive farmland, contributed to extensive job losses, and led to a 20% increase in water rates for Southern California water users. All of this was part of a scientifically questionable scheme to help the Delta smelt, a 3-inch fish in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta that has been declining for many years. A variety of factors have caused the decline, but regulators focused on one excuse, that is the water deliveries to California, to 2/3 of the people in California. Last year, a federal district court invalidated the biological opinion issued under the Endangered Species Act that led to these pumping cutbacks. And in fact, the judge blasted the Fish and Wildlife Service for using bad faith and sloppy science in imposing these water cutbacks and for ignoring the human element. The litigation, however, continues in that case, and the prospect for a regulatory drought in California remains very real. Some ESA abuses, though, flow just because the law itself is unfortunately vague. The criteria for listing species and designating critical habitat aren't clear, and that leads to a sloppy result. For instance, hundreds of miles up and down the Central Valley of California, the Valley elderberry longhorn beetle remains on the Endangered Species Act list, even though a 2006 Fish and Wildlife survey determined that it is no longer endangered and merits delisting. Because of the ESA protections for the beetle, landowners are blocked from using their property in productive ways, and water districts are complaining that it is harder to maintain the levees in California because of the ESA restrictions imposed because of the beetle's listing. Habitat designations under the ESA that are questionable put a damper on economic activity in many other states as well. For example, more than 700 miles of riverbed in Arizona and New Mexico have just been designated again as critical habitat for the spiked ace and loach minnow, even though regulators have failed to provide a scientific basis for this decision. They have not identified the physical or biological features that are essential to these fishes' conservation, and they have underestimated the economic impact of that designation. And as a result of this critical habitat designation, landowners in Arizona and New Mexico are at an increased risk of flooding. As the Coalition of Arizona and New Mexico Counties has explained, ranchers are impeded from maintaining and improving bridges and roads, as well as pumps and other flood control structures. The ESA's vague language about what constitutes a species is also a cause of regulatory mischief. For example, in Southern California, 200,000 acres of critical habitat has been designated for the coastal California gnatcatcher. The Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that the cost of that designation over the next 20 years approaches $1 billion. Recent biological studies, though, have determined that the gnatcatcher in California is, in a scientific sense, indistinguishable from the gnatcatcher in Mexico. Yet even though the species as a whole is thriving in Mexico, the Fish and Wildlife Service refuses to lift the listing in Southern California and free property owners to use their land in job-creating ways. Too often, even where the ESA is crystal clear in its mandates, federal regulators fail to comply. For example, the ESA requires that the Fish and Wildlife Service conduct a review every 5 years of every species listed to determine whether, in fact, that listing is still appropriate. One high-profile example, which has already been discussed this morning, is the gray wolf. Remarkably, the gray wolf has been protected under the ESA for decades, but the service had failed to conduct any of the required scientific reviews to determine whether the listing of the gray wolf in any part of its range is still merited. The service did not begin that review process until Pacific Legal Foundation filed a successful lawsuit in Washington last year that has settled and has resulted in the promise that that long overdue review will be completed and published. These are the kinds of issues that my organization deals with every day: environmental regulations that ignore the law, bend it, or push vague statutory language to the limit, leaving dramatic economic impacts with very few environmental benefits. The need for reform is great, for more balance and concern for a healthy economic environment, as well as for more scientific rigor to make sure that when we do attempt to protect the environment, we do it in an efficient way without harming the constitutional rights of private property owners throughout this country. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Mayor Fife.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I appreciate your concern over these issues and matters. My purpose in testifying today is to make you aware that the EPA, in our case, made an arbitrary regulatory action that, in my opinion, belittles the process and demonstrates that while the EPA says it takes comments, it just goes through the motions to impose its will regardless of the science. Let me first give you a background on the issues that we faced that has had a significant impact on our economic development over the last few years. On September 21st, 2006, the EPA promulgated revisions to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards of PBM 2.5 particulate matter. It retained the primary annual standard. However, it lowered the 24-hour standard from a level of 65 to 35 micrograms per cubic meter. States were required to designate the areas not later than a year as being attained or non-attained or unclassifiable. The Clean Air Act requires a designation of non-attainment for any area that does not meet those standards or an area that contributes to the air quality in a nearby area that does not meet those standards. And that's the issue that we faced. In Utah, ambient PM 2.5 data collected over the past years shows that the 24-hour standard has never been violated in the states throughout the whole state. I'm sorry, the annual standard has never been violated, but with the new 24-hour standard, much of the urbanized monitored area did violate the standard. The monitoring data collected suggests a couple of important things to keep in mind. First, the data shows that it is a seasonal problem characterized by periods of high concentrations of fine particulate that consist mostly of secondary particulate. The formation of these secondary particulates is driven by wintertime temperature inversions which trap the air in urbanized areas. The mix of emissions associated with the urbanized areas reacts very quickly under these conditions to produce spikes of concentration of the fine particulates. Second, under these conditions, the observed concentrations are fairly uniform throughout the entire urbanized area. The data clearly highlights the distinction between urban and rural areas. Much of this phenomenon is also due to the fact that the population is generally located within the lowland valley areas in which the area is easily trapped by the temperature inversions. The vast majority of Utah is sparsely populated. Box Elder County is larger than the states of Rhode Island, Delaware, Connecticut, and Hawaii, but the population is less than 50,000 people, of which 35% live in Brigham City. Brigham City is located approximately 60 miles north of Salt Lake and is the largest city in Box Elder County. Most of the monitoring data in Utah has been collected in the urbanized portions of the state. There is only one air quality monitor in all of Box Elder County, and that is located in Brigham City behind McDonald's on Main Street. The monitor in Brigham City has never shown a violation of the new standard during the period evaluated by the EPA. But based on the examination of all data identified by the EPA, the state of Utah recommended that Box Elder County be designated as an attainment area. However, in December 2009, EPA designated a portion of Box Elder County as non-attainment. The designation area included Brigham City and two smaller communities to the south of Brigham City, then jogged out 30 miles to the west, taking in an uninhabited portion of the county to include ATK's rocket manufacturing facility, for which no data existed at all. Even with the employee reductions resulting from the change in the space program, ATK has approximately 1,500 employees in Box Elder County. Just a few years ago, that was over 3,500. We invited the Region 8 EPA Air Program Director and some of the staff members to visit the area and discuss the issue. They were taken on a flight over portions of Box Elder County designated as non-attainment to illustrate the topography and the interaction with the urbanized Wasatch Front. The topography is quite unique, which results in much different weather patterns than the Salt Lake area. For example, the Wasatch Front was recently designated as a disaster area with winds that exceeded hurricane strength. But during the event, Brigham City had much reduced winds and received no damage whatsoever. We asked the EPA representative how they came to the conclusion to designate a portion of Box Elder County as non-attainment. They stated that their model showed that pollution from Brigham City contributes to those areas south of Brigham City and do not meet the new standards. We all laughed and said, "You need to be here on one of those inversion days." Anyone can tell you that it's just the opposite. You can watch the haze from the front move up from the Salt Lake area. We asked what wind data they used, and they said they only had the Salt Lake Airport data and Pocatello, Idaho data. It was apparent that the model was flawed and the data did not represent the real situation. We suggested that we had wind, temperature, and barometer data right at our local airport. We were told that they couldn't use that data because it wasn't certified by the EPA. It was also suggested that they use data from Hill Air Force Base. They looked at it and verified our statements. However, again, they ignored the data. I asked that they take Box Elder data out of the model and see how it affected the pollution levels in the Salt Lake area. I was told that it made no difference because it was much lower than any other probable contributors to the pollution problems in the Salt Lake area. In conclusion, let me summarize 3 points. In reaching the conclusion that Brigham City and a portion of Box Elder was designated as a non-attainment air quality area, the EPA used data that was too limited and too far removed from Box Elder to provide an accurate assessment. When the state of Utah and others called this fact to the EPA's attention and pointed out the windrows data of the Hill Air Force Base showed the winds moved in exactly the opposite direction from what the EPA concluded by their modeling, the new and more reliable data was essentially ignored, and they retained their prior conclusion that Box Elder was contributing to the PM 2.5 pollution in Salt Lake. EPA seemed to justify its predetermined result, even if that meant applying different standards to different areas of the county. As stated before, Box Elder is a very large county with a very small population. As support for its conclusions that there were emissions coming from Box Elder to Salt Lake, EPA contends that a large percentage of the population commutes to the Salt Lake area. EPA has distorted the significance of auto emissions issued that they commute. We only commute probably 300 to 400 cars at most, compared to hundreds of thousands or millions in the Salt Lake area. There are actually many that commute from Salt Lake to Box Elder County to work at ATK, Nucor, and Procter & Gamble. It is interesting to note that the population density of Salt Lake County is 1,396 persons per square mile, while Box Elder County is 8 persons per square mile. The problem along the Wasatch Front is not a function of what is happening in Box Elder County. Box Elder is a rural area which in its own right is an attainment area. The science does not support that pollutants from Box Elder County find their way to Salt Lake, but it does show that pollution from Salt Lake County does impact Box Elder County. The data shows that Box Elder mimics the Salt Lake data on the inversion days, but at a much lower level as the Salt Lake pollution reaches Box Elder County. Box Elder and the state of Utah and their experts, people who live and breathe here, know which way the wind blows. I guess because the EPA says so, the winds always blow favorably in the EPA's direction. Imposing the non-attainment designation on our rural area that is trying to stimulate growth, attract new businesses, keep old businesses, and otherwise survive in this economy is simply unfair. In 2009, after 40 years, Procter & Gamble built the first plant in the United States in Box Elder County. I asked the plant manager who helped pick the site if it would have made a difference in selecting their site in Box Elder had it been designated as a non-attainment area for air quality. He indicated that it would have been a major factor in making their decision. By including ATK in the non-attainment area without any justification, it appears that the EPA is against business and jobs. Our major employers are very conscious about the environment and our air quality. In summary, it appears the EPA, having been challenged and shown to be wrong, is unwilling to take any of the new wind data into account and make adjustments to their flawed modeling. Rather, the EPA comes across as acting like a bully, unflinching in its intention to impose its will while giving lip service to scientifically sound evidence that contradicts its view. Again, regardless of the science and facts, EPA's modeling dictates the way the wind blows. Just because EPA says the wind blows in a certain direction doesn't necessarily make it so. However, it is difficult to refute the EPA even in the court systems because the courts have a history of deferring to the EPA as the experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Johnson.
Honorable caucus members, should have a map that gives you an idea that they've passed out. I am Buster Johnson, the chairman of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors in Arizona and the co-chair of the Arizona-Utah Local Economic Coalition. All these counties and towns are directly affected by uranium exploration, mining and milling, and therefore tremendously negatively impacted by the Department of Interior's recent withdrawal of 1 million acres of the country's richest uranium resource. You'll note on the northern Arizona land status map that the withdrawal area, the 3 parcels outlined in red, sits in a virtual sea of federal lands, which are already closed to mining. In fact, the Arizona Strip, the area lying between the Utah border south of the Grand Canyon, contains less than 1% of privately owned lands, and federal ownership in most of the surrounding counties averages 80% or more. The federal government's control over the region's land has forced the residents to rely on tourist-based jobs, which are tied to the area's numerous natural parks, BLM areas, etc., and has resulted in low-paying, seasonal employment and a resulting unemployment rate of 18%. And an annual wage of $22,000 to $26,000, which is far below the $41,000 nationally. These figures don't include the rates of the nearby Native American tribes. Tribal members of the Navajo Nation have a current unemployment rate of 50% and an annual per capita income of $7,100. prime example of the economic health of the communities at schools. Kane County School District in Utah borders the Arizona Strip, where 8 uranium deposits were mined on BLM lands during the 1980s and mid-90s, and the timber industry also thrived on U.S. Forest Service lands. Shortly after the uranium and timber industry shut down, the student population started dropping and went from a high of 1,459 students to 1,175, a drop of 284 students. Now, that loss translates into a revenue loss of $2.8 million a year. That's not only the school system, but the general economy. The impact has been significant. Teaching positions and programs were eliminated. Schools shrank to 2 to 3 students per grade level, drastically affecting their educational opportunities. And secondary school closed, forced students to be transferred many miles into Arizona. And Arizona schools have had the same devastation. The Fredonia School District has dropped 50% since the mines have closed. There are many personal stories I could relate to you, but I will sum it up with the fact that Kane County's suicide rate is now 4 times the national average. Their number of adults 20 to 29 years of age is 45% lower than the state average, and those 30 to 39 is 30% lower. These numbers are indicative of the death of our area with the removal of employment opportunities. Despite the claims of uranium mining opponents that tourism has and will continue to be the bedrock of the region's economy, restaurants, hotel, retail businesses all continue to close, and our young people are moving to rural, metropolitan areas for employment. The Obama administration insistence that uranium mining will harm the Grand Canyon ecosystem, thereby ruining the region's tourism-based economy, is pure fear-mongering and totally ignores uranium mining's track record in the area. The reality is that during the 10-year period from 1981 to 90, while uranium mining was in full swing in northern Arizona, visitation doubled to the Grand Canyon from 2 to 4 million visitors. During this time, safe, environmentally friendly mining occurred with little or no notice by visitors to nearby attractions on federal land. Exactly what is the administration forcing these local communities to give up by shoving the northern Arizona withdrawal down our collective throats? In our impact study, over a 40-year period, there's over 1,000 new jobs created just for the mining. With a $40 million annual payroll, almost $30 billion in output, $2 billion in federal and state corporate income, $168 million in state severance taxes, and $9.5 million in mining claim payments and fees to local governments. I have worked to develop a coalition of local support to assist you in Congress by putting together a coalition of counties and towns from Arizona and Utah. How will this help you? It lets you know that we are real people. We are fairly politically savvy, and that every new job created in our sparse part of the county is worth 10 times to us what one job created in the big city is worth. I believe the examples I've just shared emphasize that point. Together with my elected colleagues, we have put together a well-thought-out plan which will, we believe, ultimately bring us success. Success for us is fully revoking the Salazar withdrawal. Each of you, like us, no doubt is offended to know that with one single misuse of executive branch authority, in this case the withdrawal itself, overturns the express will of Congress, which by law and in the Constitution itself granted authority expressly to Congress, the legislative branch, over how federal government-owned lands should be used. On behalf of all my local government colleagues in Arizona and Utah, I urge you to make this Obama administration action a short-term detour, not a permanent edict. Here's our plan to overturn it, which requires your continued support. First, local governments in Arizona and Utah intend to file legal action shortly challenging the administration's failure to coordinate with us. Likewise, the aggrieved companies intend to file their lawsuits. Meanwhile, as our leaders here in Congress, Senators McCain, Hatch, Kyle, Lee, Murkowski, Barrasso, and Alexander, along with House Natural Resources Committee Chairman Hastings, Subcommittee Chairman Bishop, Arizonans Frank, Gosar, Flake, Quayle, and Schweikert, Utahns, Chaffez, and Madison, and dozens of all of you are looking for legislative opportunities to overturn the Obama-Salazar Arizona withdrawal. We'll continue working on that objective until this wrong is righted and the crucial and environmentally justified mining is allowed to go forward as was envisioned. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Knight.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. On behalf of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Kansas Livestock Association, about the issues facing agriculture when dealing with the federal government's regulatory regime. My name is Mark Knight, and I raise livestock and multiple crops in Lyons, Kansas. The United States cattle industry has set the bar for the rest of the world in terms of environmental protection. A recent study by Dr. Judith Capers showed that from 1977 to 2007, the U.S. beef industry has greatly improved on almost every environmental front. We use less land, we use less cattle, and less water to produce the same amount of beef. Our industry has made an overall reduction in our carbon footprint of 16.3%. We are improving and will continue to improve. But in order for the United States to continue to set the bar for environmental stewardship, there must also be a business environment that allows American farmers and ranchers to operate. The current one is unsustainable, and one of the major factors is the regulatory burdens and the uncertainty. Like death by 1,000 cuts, each regulation adds cost to my operation, eventually bleeding us to death. Consider the following examples. First, the EPA's current national ambient air quality standard for coarse particulate matter, also known as dust. If EPA lowers the dust standards now or in the future, it would be extremely burdensome to our state's economy, not to mention our operations. While we're encouraged by the administrator's promise to propose to retain the current standard, we need permanent certainty. We applaud Representatives Noam Pierce and all their colleagues for passing the Farm Dust Regulation Prevention Act and strongly encourage the Senate to follow suit. My second example, EPA's Clean Water Act, Section 308 CAFO reporting rule that was proposed in October of last year. EPA's proposed rule would require owners and operators of CAFOs to report a laundry list of information to the agency, including the address of my feed yard. EPA intends to require producers to upload this information to its website, where it will be displayed for the entire world, including animal rights extremists and possibly terrorists. This rule puts my own family at risk. My house is just a few hundred feet away from our operation, our feed yard operation. And that, if there's any acts of terrorism or harassment occurring due to the feed yard and where the feed yard's located, it's also right near my home, near my family. It seems EPA, though, would rather negotiate with environmentalists and put our food system in jeopardy than to come to the table with industry and truly work with us in solving any direct environmental concerns. My third example hits very close to home as well. The Flint Hills region of Kansas is the last large expanse of unplowed tallgrass prairie in North America. Prescribed burning is used by private ranchers as a predominant management tool to improve rangeland productivity. It is also used by private conservation groups and federal agencies as a key ecological management tool to preserve and maintain the prairie habitat. When the Kansas Department of Health and Environment expressed concern over high particulates and ozone levels due to the prescribed burning in the Flint Hills, the agriculture community came together and developed the Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan. This plan demonstrates that if there are concerns, agriculture is willing to come sit down and help address them. At this time, I want to thank Senator Moran for continuing to push this solution to make it a permanent solution. The Flint Hills Preservation Act recognizes the unique challenge in the Flint Hills and will bring some common sense to the federal air policies so we can effectively manage these native grasslands. Unfortunately, the list of harmful regulation bleeding agriculture to death goes on and on, including greenhouse gas regulations, Superfund reporting requirements, numeric nutrient criteria, emissions requirements for large engines. I'm going to hit on that for just a second. We're also in trucking operations as well. One example, when the new engine came out for one of our feed trucks at the feed yard, it was in the shop 13 times that first year, and the cost is on us. Even though there's warranties, it's still downtime, and I'm sure you all know that cattle need fed at the same time every day, and it needs to be accurate. In another trucking operation, we bought 3 brand-new semi-trucks, and every one of them has already been, within 8,000 miles, has already been in the shop for 2.5 at least to 3 weeks. And all because they're not quite sure how to diagnose the problem, and if they do diagnose the problem accurately, the parts have to be shipped from somewhere in this country. That's what the EPA has done as far as the efficiency of our operations, just in that side. When I was on the Governor Sebelius's KEEP board, I brought that up to the entire group as well. Obviously, she's not there, and the program is done. I'll just keep on going. The Endangered Species Act regulations, Department of Regulations, Department of Labor regulations, livestock marketing regulations, and outdated transportation regulations. The estate tax is pretty big. Big time deal there on that estate tax. Because of the volume and weight of regulation has increased so dramatically over the last 10 years, many operations like my own are no longer able to complete all the compliance paperwork with just one employee. This adds cost to our operations without improving productivity, and much of the time gives no additional environmental protection whatsoever. I know a case where a feed yard operator was fined by EPA for not putting a 0 in the operational log on days it did not rain. Another instance where the operator was fined because he didn't mark the box that the ground was thawed when nutrients were applied, even though it was in August. We have bigger problems to worry about if the ground in Kansas is still frozen in August. Washington might think that this is regulatory job creation, but what it really does is prevent investment and expansion, which would create jobs. When presented with the opportunity to buy another local feed yard, my family, we turned it down. Senator Roberts was right. I'm tired of it. And we turned that down because we just didn't feel like we had any energy left to indulge in what would be more and more regulatory headaches. Farmers and ranchers pride themselves as being the primary stewards of our natural resources because we want to be able to pass our operations on down to our children. It is my hope that today's discussion will help facilitate a more productive relationship between regulators and producers, and that we can work together to solve America's environmental challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. We appreciate all our panelists. We have a couple of our members who have got some urgencies to move on with, and so we're going to go quickly first to Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Seconds, it's hard to believe that you have to go through what you've gone through. We really appreciate the Pacific Legal Foundation and what you've been doing to try and protect us from these outrageous approaches towards not just the environment, but in so many other ways as well. I'm going to get to you, Mayor, in just a second. We're grateful to all of you. Let me just talk about our mayor. Mayor, just so everybody understands your credentials, you were a professor of chemistry at the Air Force Academy for a long time. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I'm a retired Air Force officer, and I was a emeritus tenured professor, deputy head of the chemistry department at the United States Air Force Academy, and then I've also taught at Utah State University. I managed ATK's lab, chemistry labs for 16 years, and also solved many problems for NASA.
You're pretty outraged at the approach they've taken to your community, aren't you?
Yes, I actually looked into the data and how the analysis of the filters and so forth to see the point sources and all of those types of issues. So it really was very upsetting to see how the EPA handled this situation.
It's just arbitrary. It's what they're doing. Let me just say this. You also pointed out that the non-attainment is seasonal to wintertime inversions, which occur uniformly throughout the urban areas. Do I understand your testimony correctly that this uniformity is evidence that your region, which is outside these urban areas, could not be contributing to that non-attainment status? Could you just explain that to us?
Well, Actually, we also joined in a lawsuit against the EPA with ATK to support ATK in that, and we just found out Friday that after 2 years, we originally filed in Denver at the district court there, and then after a year, the EPA was able to get a venue change to the Washington, D.C. court, which would be more favorable to the EPA. It turns out that the way it was ruled is the EPA just had to show any contribution to the area. So even if they could show one car commuted to the Salt Lake area, that was sufficient. They didn't have to show how much contributed, just that there was a contribution to the area. I think if you added up all the cars in Box Elder County, it would make no impact in the actual number rounded off for the pollution in the Salt Lake area. So it's just not possible that we could contribute in that vein that the EPA has said.
According to the monitoring data, Box Elder County was within compliance with the EPA standards. However, EPA chose to change the boundaries of an existing non-attainment area to include your county.
Yes.
Can you help us explain the rationale for this decision by the EPA, and what was the science behind their decision?
Well, the Clean Air Act says that if you contribute to a non-attainment area, then you can be designated as non-attainment. And so their approach is that we contributed to the Salt Lake area, and as I mentioned, in terms of even a car commuting down there. But the wind directions and so forth shows, as I said, that Salt Lake is what contributes to Box Elder County and not to that area.
Well, I'd like to make sure
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think so, unless you want to give more. But I want to, let me just make sure of this one point for the record. Utah's Department of Air Quality stated very clearly that there was no scientific backing for the EPA, including Box Elder, including Box Elder into the non-attainment area. And under normal circumstances, what is the state's role in this type of decision?
The state said that they did not want Box Elder County to be designated as non-attainment. In fact, I worked with the DEQ in the state in going over some of these statements, and they agreed entirely with the statement. And they tried to get the EPA to do different modeling, understand that their modeling was flawed, and tried to explain, let's use our model. But the EPA says, well, this is the model that we use everywhere in the whole nation, but it just didn't apply to the way the topography was and the mountains there in the Wasatch Front.
Well, so what we see here is the EPA breaking two very important principles. First, the EPA ignores the proper role of the state agency that should be given primacy in this decision. And secondly, the EPA ignores all the available science related to that decision.
Absolutely.
Now, could you just tell us a little bit more about what this action by EPA will mean to Brigham City, a town of around 18,000 people?
Well, we have several projects that we're trying to recruit right now, and it is a big issue for them to see that we are in a non-attainment area. I tried to use the example of Procter & Gamble. Luckily, they came in before this happened, but they are a very green company, very cognizant of the air quality and other issues in the environment. And when a company we're trying to recruit to come in, looks at that we're in a non-attainment for air quality, it just is a drastic decision on their part to say, oh, do we want to have our employees and our company in a non-attainment area for poor air quality, when indeed we have no poor air quality.
Well, Dr. Fife, we're really happy to have you here today, and as a mayor, I want to congratulate you for the good job you're doing. I want to thank my colleagues for allowing me to go out of order because of my schedule, and I just appreciate all our House members and Senate members here today. This shows that we in the West are getting pretty doggone fed up with what's going on back here, and frankly out there as well. But we appreciate you taking time, every one of you,
Thank you.
Come and help us to understand this better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hatch. And Representative Gosar.
Well, thank you for allowing me to go out of order as well, Chairman. Supervisor Johnson, I really want to thank you for being here today and to briefly discuss what's going on in northern Arizona from our forests to our mining industry. You're exactly right. The environmentally responsible development of Americans' vast energy and mineral resources in the Arizona Strip will expand our domestic energy supply, create new high-paying jobs, and lessen our dependence on foreign energy and minerals, and generate revenue for federal and state treasuries. In fact, right now, we are actually importing 95% of our uranium into this country. In your testimony, you mentioned that a recent study estimated that the withdrawal will stifle the creation of over 1,000 high-paying jobs, creating $29.4 billion in economic output, $2 billion in federal and state corporate income taxes, and many other direct economic benefits. This is just direct benefits, right? Based off your experience, what type of multiplier effect does just one mining project have for our communities?
Basically, with the jobs, it's very conservative to say a four multiplier would be very conservative. And as far as the money goes, these people are the salt of the earth, just much like the ranchers and everybody else who are up here. These are people who take their money, spend it in their community. They're buying cars, they're going to the grocery store, they're buying drywall. This money is put back in. These aren't silicone chip people who are taking their money and hiding it offshore. These people generate a vast amount of money into the community.
So let's go back through that testimony again. When you when multiple projects were operating in the Arizona Strip in the 80s, did anyone even notice? Was tourism negatively affected? Was northern Arizona less habitable?
No, it actually increased up there because of, at that time, like I said, they doubled the visitation to the Grand Canyon. So if anything, it was increased because we had more miners working out there who I'm just guessing had more family members come in who took advantage of the resources that are around us.
So the tourism industry was actually, and the regional economy was actually much stronger, enhanced, right?
Yes, it was enhanced with the mining.
You visited Arizona's one mine, currently operational in Fredonia, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So much of the technology has changed in the last 20 to 30 years. The environmental footprint is minimal and the process is very safe, correct?
Yes.
These are very minimal. In your mind, the administration's withdrawal is completely unnecessary and undermines the economic viability of northern Arizona.
Yes, and I think it perpetuates a fraud on the people by saying that the Grand Canyon itself is going to be harmed when these mines are miles away from even the Grand Canyon buffer area. The area now is only 15 acres is all it is. These aren't open pit mines like we would have seen in the past. These are breccia pipes, which are very small, contained. The rock is taken out. It's transported in a covered truck to Utah where the tailings and everything are processed. The used rock is brought back and placed in the same hole, so the contamination is pretty much zero.
Yeah, I've been there and very impressed. I'd like to expand beyond the mining ban and discuss other land management issues that threaten northern Arizona's region. There's quite a bit of federally administrated land and the resources in our region, correct?
Yes, Mojave County is 13,500 square miles. Over 90% of our land is federal or state.
The administration says it's taking actions like the mining ban to protect our tourism economy, but they're actually prohibiting economic development and threatening existing tourism in your area. You're from Lake Havasu City. Can you talk a little bit about the struggles on Lake Havasu, a large reservoir behind the Parker Dam, Colorado River, that attracts over 3 million visitors a year and serves as a major economic engine in your area? What type of federal red tape restricts economic activity there?
Well, it's once again, we have every alphabet in the world there. We have the Bureau of Reclamation, we have Fish and Game, BLM is on the land. Anybody you can imagine shows up there. Anytime you want to get a permit, you have the Corps of Engineers you have to go through. If you want to put an anchor on the floor, you have to have the Corps of Engineers permit. If you want to do any kind of dredging to try to get an area that's safe for the people to go into, you have to go through 4 or 5 agencies, except when it comes to trying to get some help, and then there's no agency that's in charge that can oversee the rest of them. They all ignore you when you ask to put together a panel and say we'll do it. And even as far as going from the lake issue, our BLM land surrounds Lake Havasu, which is a tremendous tourism draw for us because people come from California, Nevada, and everywhere to four-wheel and enjoy the beautiful desert. They're hikers, there's four-wheel drive people, there's horseback people. They're shutting those areas down to our people now, the trails. And then they go, well, we're only shutting part down. Yeah, they shut down the part where you get on, so you can't get to the part that's open, so your people can't go out and enjoy it. So there's just, the regulations put on by the federal government, and you had some people talking about the quagmire mussels and those things before, it is almost impossible that our area, which is the highest tourism area for a water body in Arizona, is starting to go down just because of the regulations.
The National Park Service is also developing deeply flawed regulations that threaten the Grand Canyon air tours. The industry provides over 1,200 high-paying jobs, generating over $104 million in economic activity. The administration really isn't protecting our tourism economy at all, are they?
No, they aren't.
We're really taking it on the chin in Arizona. Stifle economic development in our top recreation is overregulating vital aspects of the canyon tourism's economy and banning domestic energy production. The government just needs to get out of the way and let northern Arizona's economy thrive on its own. Buster, you're the chair of the Quad City local governments made up of counties from Arizona, California, Utah, and Nevada. How have ineffective Endangered Species Act recovery efforts for the desert tortoise negatively affected economic productivity on the BLM in your region?
What we have to do now, and a lot of people that are familiar with the tortoise will realize anytime you do a project that they think is in a tortoise area, you have to put tortoise fencing up, which is just this little crummy plastic orange fence that sits about that high. You bury it in the ground, and it costs you about $15,000 a mile on both sides to put it in, which doesn't really do anything, and then you have to tear it out of the ground because now the EPA says you're polluting the ground with doing these things. You're getting in the California area, some places in Nevada. It's starting to get Utah. It hasn't got to Arizona yet. We're trying to fight it. BLM is allowing solar to be put on their lands, thousands and thousands of acres, but they're requiring of the person putting the solar on for next to nothing to go out and buy 3 times the amount of private land and give it to the federal government, which takes it out of our tax rolls, which is just killing us. The military bases in California have been affected greatly because of the tortoise, so that when they're doing their training for all of our people that are going overseas, where all the lands they have, a lot of it is considered to be tortoise, it shut those down. And the thing I think that bothers me the most, and it's another one of these catch-22s that we're always talking about, is I've been involved in this for 16 years now in the tortoise, and we all want to save the tortoise. I mean, we all want to save the bald eagle. We're not so big about some of those fish, but you know, we'll save the big things. But there is nobody doing anything that has saved one tortoise. If a tortoise is taken out, and like the military bases in California, they raise the tortoise and keep them so the hatchlings, you're not allowed to put those back into the wild because they might bring a disease in, which actually helps go through the cycle and strengthens our tortoises. When you meet with all these different bureaucrats, they're just protecting their jobs. They want millions of dollars to do investigations, but never come up with an idea of how it will affect the tortoise. To this date, we have not one report that says by removing mining, by removing the ranchers, by removing off-roaders, that it has saved one tortoise life. And I guess that's what bothers us. We all want to do something positive. We all want to keep the earth green, but when it's just to keep people's jobs, it's frustrating.
Well, Supervisor Johnson, thanks for coming and thanks for being involved. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Next, Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be brief. Mike and Chantel, thank you for what you're doing. There's a lot of people who wouldn't have the fortitude that you've had to do this. I mean, as the Supreme Court Justice said, this is just, it's unbelievable. It's just outrageous. This is something that happens in a third world country, not to people who are supposedly free, living under a constitution that gives us right. Mr. Schiff, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Dr. Fife, when I was governor, I tried to meet with every city in Idaho, large, small, medium. And that story that you told, it would be nice if we could say, gee, that's kind of a unique situation. Almost every small city in America has the exact same type of a story that you're telling, where the data is flawed, where the requirements are just totally unreasonable. And for all of you, I can tell you that it'd be nice if we could say these are unusual stories. Those of us who represent Western states hear these things every single day. Where's the common sense? It's gone. It's absolutely gone. When you hear these things about the EP and what they do, you wonder what can they possibly be thinking. They've lost their way. Everyone in America wants clean air and clean water. We all want it, we all demand it, and we can do that if we just act reasonably. But common sense has gone out the window, reason has gone out the window, and the result of that is they are really doing the objective a disservice because everybody's getting disgusted with it. And at the end of the day, it hurts what we're all trying to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Pierce.
Thank you, and Senator Crapo would like to say thanks for pulling this group together. This has been a stunning array of stories that we've had in testimony that we've heard today, beginning with the Sacketts. I just came back from Vietnam. That is a communist country, and just recently a very high-profile case there. The government owns all of the land, but they let the people use it, and the government was going to take back a piece of land that an individual's family had had for generations. The nation came together and stood up to the government, stood behind the individual. He dug his heels in and said, "I'm not leaving." And it sounds very much like what the Sacketts have done. And just about a week or so ago, the Prime Minister came out against the government on the side of the people. So if it can happen in a communist country, maybe we can find people here in this country that will actually start standing up against our government. Because the Sacketts case is repeated in New Mexico. We've got the Gosses who've been through decades of court hearings. Just this last summer, an additional court found against the government. And so during a drought, the government went in and fenced off all the water supplies that were supposed to be available to the rancher, and our office had to intervene in that. I was impressed by Dr. Fife's testimony. He's a PhD, a scientist, and he's there calling the EPA a bully. I appreciate that. I would note that when the Sacketts talk about the fear and we hear the word bully used, that it was Thomas Jefferson, that noted that when the government fears the people, we have liberty, and when the people fear the government, we have tyranny, and we're moving towards tyranny in this country, and we hear it day after day after day. Mr. Knight's testimony was very effective to that. Just Mr. Johnson's testimony about the withdrawal acts. We're allowing Congress to be bypassed by agencies. The Wilderness Act describes that only Congress can make the withdrawals, but we find with the roadless rules that the agencies are doing it. I'll just restrict myself to one question, Mr. Chairman. And when, Mr. Schiff, when you got the EPA finally, they said there are no appeals. You can't come to us. You can't talk to us. We're somehow above the people. We as the agency of the EPA don't have to address everyday common people like the Sacketts. So when you finally got them into court and you made your arguments, what did they say about why they about their actions regarding not just the Sacketts, but many people just like them? What did they say?
They have said that they can't be brought into court because if they have to answer for their actions, and that will preclude them from effectively protecting the environment and administering the Clean Water Act. So they're afraid of judicial review because they think that will prevent them from asserting their power as they wish. And in that respect, they're absolutely correct. But I think that their sense as to what their mission is terribly misguided.
They're afraid of having anyone review because they know that people like Mr. Fife are going to show the inadequacy of the science that they're using, the processes that they're using. That's what they're afraid of. And it's time for all people to stand up. Again, just to close, we've had 3 massive demonstrations of people walking in the streets because I said, I don't think I can cure the problem in Washington. I don't think Washington will vote to stand up for your rights. So the roadless rule, almost 1,000 people showed up over there in Silver City, New Mexico. endangered species. Another 1,000 showed up in Roswell, New Mexico, saying, you are not going to kill our jobs without us protesting. And then finally on the management of the forest. So we're just going to the people and saying that the people are the government here. So thank you all for your hard work, for your courage in standing up. Appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thank you. And Senator Moran.
Senator Crapo, thank you. It's good to see my former colleague, Mr. Pierce.
There we go.
Good to see my former colleague, Mr. Pierce, and I apologize my inability to be here earlier today, but I wanted to come and especially welcome my Kansas friend, Mr. Knight, for his being here, and I look forward to having a discussion with you this afternoon in our office. But I know a bit about your operation, and I wanted you to explain to my colleagues the cost of regulations, what it means to you and your operation, and particularly in light of the national agenda of trying to create jobs. Can you tell us anything about the burden of the regulatory burden and what its consequence is for creating jobs in Rice County, Kansas, for you to expand your operation, for you to hire more people? There's this, I hear it time and time again from Kansans about the regulations are killing us, and you come to Washington, D.C., and you're told, well, regulations don't have anything to do with stymieing the growth of the economy. I assume you have an opinion about that, Mark.
I do. I do have an opinion. I'll just go through, historically, just to start out in 96, that's the year we decided to expand the feed yard. And in doing so, and the reason we did is because our customer base was very good. We had and we still have great people. We have too many good people, so we expanded, right? And when we did that, I had the permits. Everything was fine with KDH&E. Everything was fine, and we built the lagoon like we should have. Compacted the sides, got the slopes, planted the grass. That was and this is big money to us. It's about $170,000 just to build that one lagoon, not including the pumping equipment and all that, but just the dirt work. 4 years later in 2000, they were out to visit again, and we were driving around, and I was told that, oh, by the way, you need to expand the lagoon that you have. It's not big enough. My comment was, I built it based on your specs. And the answer I got was, well, things change. You're going to have to do it again. So by dredging it out, it costs a lot of money. All I could tally up is around darn near $250,000 to clean it out, rebuild it, and get everything perfected like it was, not to mention the piping and the motors and everything else that it takes. After 40 years, this May will be our 40th year as Knight Feed Yard. And this year now they're wanting us to catch water runoff from our mill floor. That's predicted to cost around another couple $100,000. You see why it's just, why put yourself through it? And we're going to, but it's just no fun. And you talk about common sense, I could go off the record and keep talking, but I won't. But anyway, yeah, the reporting, I've got one guy doing the watering, I got the same guy he's got to figure out how much moisture we get all the time. I used to do it all by myself, and it got too burdensome. So anyway, there's a total of 3 of us now that are watching the regulatory stuff that we have to do. Good question.
Mark, thank you. Just for my colleagues to know that the Knight family is just such a solid, substantial component of the Kansas economy and agriculture, and just the kind of people who would never do anything intentionally other than to do it right. And I regret that so many people come to Washington, D.C. to try to make certain that they're able to stay in business and to expand and to do the things they want to do with their lives, to pursue the American dream in a sense. And you spend your time trying to fight your own government just so you can do what is in yours and your family's best interest. I appreciate all of you coming to take time to tell us the story, and I would offer my services to my colleagues to make sure that we take the right steps to try to resolve some of these things favorably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Moran. Representative Labrador.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for convening this panel. Just want to tell you, Dr. Fife, that I've spent some time in Brigham City. It's one of my favorite places. I have a good friend from there. I went to BYU, and I would go visit my friend at Brigham City quite often. So it's one of my favorite cities. And my son went to Utah State. Even though I'm a Cougar, I've had to become an Aggie. So anyway, just Chantel and Mike, thank you for being here again. I know you've made a lot of treks out here. And I just want to ask you one simple question. You've gone through this now for a long period of time. And I assume that you wanted to have some property on Priest Lake because you want to have clean air and clean water. Is that a good assumption on my part?
Yes.
Can you explain that? I know it sounds like a ridiculous question, but the President of the United States just said that Republicans want dirty air and dirty water. He just said that just a couple of weeks ago. So can you explain?
Well, I think it would go back to when the first time I was experienced Priest Lake very young. I was 14. And by the time I was a junior in high school and had my own driver's license, that's where I always went. And I decided then that I was going to figure out how to live at Priest Lake. And, you can walk out on anyone's dock on that lake and you can see the bottom of the lake. It's something that we cherish. It's something that pulled us to Priest Lake. And we want that lake to be for generations to be like it is. And there would be no reason for us to ever not want it that way.
And on an economic analysis, even if you didn't care about the environment, what would it do to your property if the water and the air was dirty in that area?
It would devalue it for sure, and you wouldn't want to be there.
Okay. So can you tell us, you've thought about this now long and hard, what can we do at the federal level to make sure that this doesn't happen to you or to any American ever again?
Well, as you know, this fight is Chantel's and my fight, but it has got a lot bigger than that. Mm-hmm. And if we can do anything with your help, is to make sure that the EPA never walks into some family's life and do what they've done to us. And I believe that Congress is going to have to make those decisions to get the EPA to where they don't have that kind of basically no accountability. I mean, nobody's regulating them at that level. So we need your help to rein in the EPA, so they can't just walk into people's lives and you don't get your day in court.
Excellent. Again, thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions right now. I wanted to put up a couple of pictures. Can we put the first picture up? Chantel and Mike, this is, I believe, a picture of your property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This is what the EPA says is a wetland. Now, is this because the EPA has some bigger regional map that covers this area, or how did they decide this was a wetland,
Well, they told us that our property was in a wetland inventory. And when they first told us that, I had no idea what that was. So they gave us the coordinates to our property, and they said, you can go find it on the map. So we did that. It took me a while. It's a new thing that I had to kind of get myself through. And I had some help with one of our employees. Mm-hmm. But when we figured out what the coordinates were, our property wasn't in the inventory. It was around it, or the inventory was around our property. Our property wasn't on their wetlands.
So it wasn't even actually in an EPA inventory?
No, it wasn't. And when I told them that, they said, well, that's not always correct.
And I suppose you told them that there wasn't any standing water on the property also. Let's go to the second picture. And I know you made this point in your testimony, Mike, but this picture shows that this is a developed or a platted subdivision. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The subdivision was built in the early 80s, and that hopefully someday will be our neighbor.
I hope so too. And tell me again, there aren't just houses next to you, but there are roads built.
Yeah, that is correct. You are looking right to the east at that right now at that picture, and to the north and to the south would be towards the lake. There's county roads on both sides.
All right, and again, no standing water on the property of any kind.
No.
Let's just put up the last picture, and this is the one where this is your property also, correct? Or is that nearby?
No, that's we're walking on our property.
You're walking on your property here.
Yeah.
Well, my hope is that the houses we saw will be your neighbors soon, and that you'll be sitting on a porch there or whatever it is that you are able to build there. And I just want to tell you that to me, it's part of the American dream to be able to find a place where you want to live and build a life there. And to see the EPA stepping in with such outrageous conduct and then not even allowing for accountability is something that has caught the vision of many, many people in America, and I commend you for standing up and fighting back. And I know that our whole delegation in Idaho will support you in this. We've been joined by Senator Lee, and if you care to ask any questions, Senator Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to the Sacketts, I'd like to say hello once again. We met a few months ago, and after listening to your testimony a few months ago over in the Russell Building, Senator Rand Paul decided to introduce legislation, which I'm proud to co-sponsor, clarifying the term navigable waters, following the interpretation of that term used by Justice Scalia in his opinion in the Rapanos case several years ago, which I think would help clear that up substantially. A picture really does speak 1,000 words, and to call that a navigable water or to call it a wetland is quite interesting. As a fellow Westerner, I know what dry land looks like, and that's it. Mayor Fife, I wanted to just ask you a question or two about how your city and its economy have been affected by the EPA's non-attainment finding.
We talked a little bit about that, Senator Lee, that it's very difficult to, I mentioned the example of the Procter & Gamble, and speaking to them, they came in just before we were designated as a non-attainment, and I spoke to them and asked them how that would have affected their decision from the person that helped in the site management. And he said it would have been a major decision maker in determining whether they wanted to come. We're trying to actively recruit. We've got a couple of great projects we're recruiting now, and it has become an issue that we are considered a non-attainment area for air quality. So companies look at that as they try to relocate. They want an environment that's good for their employees as well as their company as well. So it's a major issue.
And I suppose, Mayor Fife, that the difficulty of it is compounded even further by the fact that there's something of a moving target when it comes to the data that are utilized in the determination as to whether or not you're in a non-attainment zone. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the state recommended that we not be a non-attainment area. They told the EPA that their model was flawed, and they didn't listen to the state. And then we did further analysis and showed them that their data was incorrect. But we actually just got a ruling from the court case that was filed this last Friday that in favor of the EPA. It's very hard to convince the court that it's arbitrary and capricious, but also they said that they didn't have to show how much was contributed. It just had to be specified that there was a contribution. So if they could show that one car commuted from Box Elder County and Brigham City to the Salt Lake area, that was sufficient for the court to say that we contributed to the pollution in Salt Lake area.
Yes, and that's a high standard to meet, isn't it? Having to show that a particular policy, a rule basically carrying the force of generally applicable law, a federal law, a statute for all intents and purposes, is arbitrary and capricious. It's such a profound difference because when you want to get a change in law passed through the traditional route, through the route called for by the Constitution, you have to take that change in law through the House of Representatives, and you have to take it through the United States Senate, and then you have to present it to the President. And unless you get it past all three of those entities, you get no change in law. But on the other hand, when it's a federal agency acting within what some refer to as our fourth branch of government, what others refer to as just part of the executive branch of government, they can just make the change of law, notwithstanding the fact that not one of them is a senator, not one of them is a representative or the president, not one of them has ever stood for any election, not one of them serves in their current job subject to re-election. And as a result, your only recourse is to take them to court and to prove that what they've done is arbitrary and capricious or outside their statutory authority, which is a very, very high hurdle to satisfy. And I see this all over our state. I see it all over the West, this problem of lawmaking by executive fiat. There was a very good reason why our founding fathers 224, almost 225 years ago, sat down and they said, the lawmaking power is a quintessential component of what it means to be a government. And we're going to entrust that power only to those who are elected and who will stand for re-election at regular intervals. We've got a problem with that. I'm fighting every day to try to overcome that. One of the solutions, I think, has to involve something called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S. It's a legislative proposal introduced in both houses of Congress that says anytime you have a federal regulation, a rule carrying the force of generally applicable law, introduced by an executive branch agency, that won't take effect, assuming it's a major rule for purposes of the OMB standards, unless or until both houses of Congress have enacted it into law and submitted it to the President for his signature or ratification. I think that would solve a lot of the problems that we have here today, and I look forward to the day when Brigham City and other communities like it no longer have to suffer the indignity and indeed the tyranny of lawmaking by people who are neither elected by the people nor accountable to anyone who is elected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lee and Representative Pierce. This will bring us to the conclusion of our hearing. Yes, did you want to say something?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I noticed you had a visual aid up, and I noticed my senior senator from Arizona wasn't here, and he does better with pictures. And I wondered if I might be able to submit a picture so that he would be able to follow through. I could show you. They have a copy of Brian would give it to you. I have a larger copy too.
Okay. And you definitely can submit that.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll make sure that your senior senator gets it.
It's basically, we are all aware of the White House's innovative use of powerful czars and their non-legislative impacts on our work and economic recovery. My turf, Mojave County, Arizona, has been on the receiving end of detrimental use of power by the Obama administration's biggest job, killing czar, the Salazar. Now, I brought an unbiased graphic visual aid with me to help explain what we were up against. The carpetbagging cowboy on the right here depicts Interior's Secretary Salazar, who has just killed off my county's efforts to garner investment and jobs while assisting the quest of America's energy independence. While the handsome miner on the left mourns the death of his faithful burro and any future for the mining industry, the mighty hunter Salazar glorifies in his recent string of kills. The Interior Secretary surely believes he is protecting the Northwest Arizona environment by taking prime uranium mining land out of action, unfortunately at a time when the country needs jobs, business growth, and expensive energy. Salazar rightfully calls the Grand Canyon area a priceless American landscape. The physical impact of mining efforts on the more than 1 million acres now off limits would be negligible, and remedial of expended mining law is currently mandated. On the other hand, I wonder what the Grand Canyon would look like if it was filled with Obama energy mirrors and propellers. You will notice the great hunter is also carrying the recently bagged Canadian Keystone Goose. The Keystone XL pipeline project would have created thousands of jobs during construction, would have brought 500 million barrels of oil per day from our close northern ally to American refineries. And once again, the current administration is killing all hopes of eventual energy independence from the world's totalitarian oil-producing country. And those of you familiar with the desert tortoise know the negative impact it has had on our economy and military bases. I just appreciate that.
Now, are you the artist?
No, one of my employees is the artist.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate that. And in conclusion, let me just indicate my thanks to Representative Pierce and Senator Barrasso for their leadership in the Congressional and the Senate Western caucuses. Because of the specific types of issues that you have each brought before us today, we have two very strong caucuses that have grown up in the House and in the Senate who are committed to finding solutions. And some of the solutions that we've identified that we need to focus on are in this booklet, the Western Caucus Jobs Frontier booklet, that you may be of interest to, and we can certainly make that available. I think the RAINS Act is one of the provisions that's in here. If not, it should be. And a number of other proposals that we've identified as solutions to push back and to try to correct the problems that we are facing. We look to you for helping us to develop not only the agenda that our caucuses will pursue, but also to help us promote a better understanding across the country of the need for these kinds of reforms. And your being here today with us has been very instrumental in that regard, whether it's individuals like the Sacketts or the Knights, or whether it's a city or a county, or someone who's working with an association or a foundation in this case, that's committed to finding solutions. People around the country are starting to recognize the incredibly broad reach of the overreach of the federal agencies. And I believe that we're going to have increasing success as we move forward here in our efforts with the caucuses to find solutions and to correct these wrongs. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time and making the effort to be with us today. And with that, unless there's anything else, this hearing will be adjourned.